You see a figure in the distance. At first, your brain says it's a person. But as it gets closer, the details start to feel wrong. The way it moves, the way its limbs are a little too long, the way it smiles when it absolutely shouldn't be smiling. Your animal brain screams at you, that is not human. But you're paralyzed because it's already seen you. We as human beings are experts at one thing, recognizing other human beings. We're wired to see faces, read emotions, and find comfort in the familiar. But what happens when that hardwiring betrays us? What happens when you're faced with something that's almost right, but just wrong? They call it the Uncanny Valley, that primal sickening feeling of dread when you see something that wears a human mask, but has nothing human behind the eyes. Tonight, we're not talking about ghosts. We're not talking about monsters that hide in the shadows. We're talking about the ones that walk right up to you, the ones that stand on your porch, the ones that stop you on a highway, the ones that might even already be in your house. We're exploring the most terrifying encounters of all, the ones that pretend to be us. The truck's engine was the only familiar sound in the dead quiet of the West Virginia night. Woodrow Derenberger sat perfectly still, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Outside his passenger window stood a man. The man was tall, tan, and wore a dark, metallic-looking suit, but that's not what held Woody's attention. It was the smile. A wide, unmoving, unnatural grin. And as Woody stared, frozen, a voice filled his mind. Not from the radio, not from the man's smiling closed mouth, but from inside of his own head. Roll down your window. We mean you no harm. Woody's hands, shaking, moved the crank. We spend a lot of our life on the road. Familiar highways, shortcuts, the long stretch of asphalt between work and home. You see thousands of cars, 1,000 faces. They all become a blur. But what if, on a perfectly normal drive, you saw something that wasn't normal at all? Something that stared back. This is the story of Woodrow Derenberger, and he was, by all accounts, a very normal man. He was a sewing machine salesman, living in Mineral Wells, Virginia. He'd spent decades traveling the highways of West Virginia and Ohio. He knew these roads like the back of his hand. He wasn't a man who believed in tall tales, which is why, on the night of November 2nd, 1966, what happened on Interstate 77 is so unsettling. He was driving his pickup along I-77, thinking about getting home to his wife and kids. He'd noticed one of the sewing machines in his truck bed shifting around, so he pulled onto the shoulder to secure it. After a minute, he checked his mirrors and pulled back onto the highway. Almost immediately, he saw a vehicle approaching from behind. It passed him, which was normal, but then it slowed down in front of him. Woody tapped his brakes, annoyed, but as he got closer, the annoyance turned to confusion. This was not a truck. This was not a car. He later described it as looking like a kerosene lamp globe. It was dark, ovular, and seemed to be made of a dark gray metal. It was about 35 feet long, completely silent, except for that soft, fluttering hum. And it wasn't on the road. It was floating about 10 inches above it. Woody's mind raced to find a rational explanation. It had to be some secret government vehicle, maybe. He was near Parkersburg, after all. He followed it, mesmerized for about a mile. Then the object slowed and stopped. It stopped right in the middle of the highway, completely blocking the road. Woody slammed on his brakes, his truck skidding to a halt just yards away. He sat there, his heart hammering in his chest, his headlights illuminating the impossible. And then a sound. A hatch, like a car door, swung open from the side of the craft. A man stepped out. The craft, the ship, slowly rose up, hovering about 75 feet in the air, waiting. The man on the pavement just looked at Woody's truck. He was tall, maybe 6 feet tall. He looked to be in his late 30s. His skin was tan, his dark hair slicked back. He wore a strange navy blue suit that zipped up in the front. It looked shiny. As the man started to walk toward the driver's side of the truck, Woodrow Derenberger realized he was smiling. Now, this wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that was just on. A wide, impossible grin that didn't touch his ears. A smile that didn't use the right muscles. The kind of smile a thing wears when it's pretending to be human. The man stopped at the passenger door. He didn't move. He just smiled. Woody was paralyzed. This couldn't be real. And then a voice came. "Roll down your window. We mean you no harm." Woody's mouth was dry. He heard the voice clear as day, right inside of his own skull. The man's smiling lips hadn't moved at all. Shaking, Woody leaned across the cab, cranked down the passenger window, and let the cool November air hit his face. The man's grin never wavered. "Have no fear," the voice in Woody's head continued. "We come from a country not nearly as powerful as yours. We wish you only happiness. We eat, we breathe, we sleep, we bleed, even as you do." Woody finally found his own voice, and he asked the man who he was and where he's from. The man's smile remained fixed. "My name's Cold," the voice said. "I am a searcher." Cold, or whatever he was, then asked Woody his name. Woody told him. Cold noted as if this was all perfectly normal. He told Woody he could speak out, or just think his questions, whatever was easier. Indrid Cold then turned his head, gesturing toward the glowing lights of a city in the distance. "What is that?" "That's Parkersburg," Woody said. "A city. It's a gathering of people." The smile seemed to widen just a fraction. "Where I'm from," Cold's voice replied, "we call them gatherings." They spoke, or rather communicated, for 5 or 10 minutes, though Woody would later say it felt like an eternity. Woody, a simple sewing machine salesman, was having a conversation with a telepathic, smiling Inhumanoid on the side of I-77. Finally, Indrid Cold's mental voice grew firm. "It is time for me to leave. We will see you again." Then he offered one last, bizarre piece of advice. We'd advise you to contact your local authorities. Report this. Right on cue, the kerosene lamp craft descended, hovering just above the road again. The hatch popped open. A hand reached out. Indrid Cold stepped back inside. The door clicked shut, loud and clear in the night air, sounding just like a car door. Then the craft shot up into the sky and vanished. Woody Derenberger sat there, trembling for how long he doesn't know. Then he jammed his truck in gear and he sped home. He burst through his front door pale and shaking, ran past his family to the phone, and did exactly what Cold had told him to do. He called the Parkersburg police. Now, you might think this is where the story ends. A local man has a mental breakdown, sees something weird, and the police quietly file it under a crank phone call. That's not what happened. The police, an Air Force representative, and 2 seasoned journalists from WTAP-TV were at his house almost immediately. They listened in skeptical shock as a frazzled, terrified Woodrow Derenberger recounted his tale. The next day, November 3rd, he gave a 30-minute on-air interview telling the entire world what he had seen. And the moment the story went public, the floodgates opened. It turned out, Woody wasn't the only one who had a strange encounter. He wasn't even the first. A month earlier, some 600 miles away in New Jersey, 2 boys, Martin and James Yantisis, were walking down the street. They saw a surreal figure standing near a fence. He was tall. He was bald. He was wearing a green metal suit. When the boys stopped to look, the man turned, pivoted, and grinned at them. A big, wide, sinister grin. And then he started sprinting after them. The boys felt terrified and barely escaped. Back in West Virginia, just days after Woody's encounter, the sightings got closer and much more personal. In the town of Point Pleasant, a town you may have heard of if you're into the paranormal, the Lilly family had been seeing strange diamond-shaped lights hovering outside their house for nights. Then, one night, the entire house was woke to the sound of their daughter, Linda, screaming. She told them what she saw. It was a man, she said. A big man, very broad. I couldn't see his face very well, but I could see that he was grinning at me. He walked around the bed and stood right over me. The Grinning Man. It wasn't just Woody's Indrid Cold. It was the man in the green suit in New Jersey. It was the big, broad man in Linda Lilly's room. And back on I-77, the same night Woody was stopped, others saw the craft. A family stopped their car and watched the ship hover for 5 minutes. 2 truck drivers further down the road were also stopped by the same craft. They reported it to paranormal investigator John Keel, but refused to give their names. Suddenly, Woodrow Derenberger's Indrid Cold wasn't just a one-off alien sighting. He was a myth, a grinning man who appeared all over the country, an inhumanoid that stalked from the shadows. And that's where the story goes down the rabbit hole. Woody Derenberger would later write a book claiming Indrid Cold and his friend Carl, yes, Carl, visited him at his home, and they took him to their home planet of Lanulos. He told that they were peaceful, nudist aliens who wanted to warn humanity. It's easy to laugh off, It's easy to dismiss Woody as a simple salesman who got a taste of fame and decided to cash in. It's easy to say he was just a crackpot. What about the others? What about the boys in New Jersey who saw the Grinning Man before Woody's story hit the news? What about the Lilly family? And what about the police and the Air Force and the reporters who took Woody so seriously? The Grinning Man is a phenomenon that haunts us to this day. Thousands of people all over the world report a nearly identical experience. Waking up in the dead of night, paralyzed in their beds, only to see a tall man with slicked back hair and a horribly wide smile standing in the corner of their room, just watching. They can call it sleep paralysis. They can call it a hallucination. In our brains, they say they're protecting us. But it all feels chillingly familiar. The tall man, the dark suit, and that smile. Woody Derenberger's encounter on that lonely stretch of I-77 wasn't the end of the story. It was the prologue. Indrid Cold, the searcher, had arrived, and he brought something with him. Or perhaps he was just the opening act, as our next Inhuman guest are dying to come in. It was 2 a.m. A blizzard was raging outside the small Vermont home. The husband and wife, woken by the pounding, looked at each other. Their first thought, someone was in an accident. When the husband opened the door, 2 children were standing in the snow, looking down at the ground. A boy and girl, no older than 8. They weren't dressed for the weather. The husband asked if they were okay and where their parents were. "They'll be here soon." Against every instinct in their body, the wife told her husband to let them in. That was her mistake. While she was sitting in the kitchen, her husband called her name, and his voice, it was strange. She walked back into the living room, and he was holding his head. A dark trickle of blood was running from his nose. As she stared at him, the power in the house clicked off. She turned. The 2 children were standing at the end of the dark hallway, and they were finally looking up, and she saw them, not eyes, just 2 pair of solid, jet black orbs. There's a fundamental rule in almost every culture, a piece of folklore so old we barely remember it, but our bodies do. You never invite a threat into your home. This isn't about a monster breaking down the door. This is about something far more sinister. This is about the thing that knocks and asks to be let in. They're known as black-eyed children. They appear to be children, anywhere from 6 to 16 years old. They look pale, almost sickly, and they have the eyes. Eyes that are completely, unnaturally black. No white, no iris, no pupil. Now, there are thousands of theories about where they come from. I have an entire video exploring their lore, whether they're demons, spirits, vampires, or something interdimensional, and you can check that out by clicking the link up top. But this story, this is about the rules. It's about what happens when you're faced with an impossible choice. It's about the one account from a woman who broke the rule. the woman who let them in, and lived to regret it. The story, for most of us, begins in 1996 in Abilene, Texas, with a journalist named Brian Bethel. It was a spring night. Brian was parked outside of a movie theater in his car, writing a check to pay his internet bill. Two boys, maybe 10 or 12, were standing by his driver's side window. Before he even rolled the window down, Brian was overcome with a feeling he couldn't explain. He described it as soul-racking fear. He had no reason to be afraid. They were just kids. He cracked the window, and one of the boys, a spokesman, did all the talking. He said they needed a ride. They wanted to see the movie Mortal Kombat, but they'd left their money at their mom's house. It sounded plausible enough, but the fear Brian felt was paralyzing. It was almost primal. His rational mind was fighting back. They're just kids, he thought. And then his rational mind found a lifeline. He looked up at the theater marquee, and the last showing of Mortal Kombat had already started. By the time he drove them anywhere and back, the movie would be over. He looked back at the spokesman. The boy seemed to sense a shift. He leaned in, and his voice was flat. "It won't take long. We don't have a gun or anything." Brian's blood ran cold. Why the hell would he say that? He looked. He really looked at the spokesman. In his mind, as he put it, exploded in a vortex of all-consuming terror. The boy's eyes, they were coal black, soulless orbs, like two great swaths of a starless night. Brian's hands fumbled for the gear shift. He started to roll up the window, stammering apologies, excuses, just anything to get away. The spokesman's face changed. The confusion was gone, and it was replaced by anger. He put his hand on the glass and banged on it, hard. And his voice echoes in Brian's mind to this day. "We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in." Brian sped out of that parking lot, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. He looked in his rearview mirror. The boys were gone, vanished without a trace. He was safe. He hadn't given them permission. What happens when you do? They target the vulnerable, and they're patient. There's another story. A woman taking her 9-year-old son with her to a mini-mart for milk. The son wanted to wait in the car, belted in the back seat, so she locked the doors and ran inside. She said she was gone for less than 5 minutes. But when she came back, she saw him. Another kid was sitting in the back seat, right next to her son. The woman dropped the milk. A primal terror seized her, and she ripped open the back door, grabbed her son, and pulled him out. And that's when she saw the other child's eyes, jet black. A look, she said, of pure evil. She ran back into the store, screaming for the clerk to call 911. And when they looked back out, the child was gone. Later, her husband arrived and they asked the son what happened. How did the boy get in? And the son's answer was simple. He said the kid came up to the window and said, "I want in." And the boy, thinking it would be fun to have somebody to play with, let him in. The family drove home in 2 cars. The husband in the SUV his son had been in. And on the way, the SUV was in a wreck. A horrible one. And it was totaled. The next day, the son got sick. For 8 months. He was plagued by unexplained illnesses. Symptoms that seemed to change every time they went to the doctor. The family was only healed after their church prayed over the boy for weeks. And they had a small taste of what happens when you open the door. But one couple, they didn't just open the door, they invited them in for cocoa. The rule is so simple. They can't come in unless you say it's okay. But they are so persuasive. They prey on our guilt. They prey on our compassion as humans. It's a snowstorm. They're just children. What harm can they do? We return to that small house in rural Vermont. The husband and his wife stand at the door, looking at these 2 small children. Their instincts, their guts, were screaming at them that something was wrong. The kids just stood there, looking at the ground, never making eye contact. The wife asked where their parents were.
"They'll be here soon."
It was 2 a.m. It was a blizzard. The wife later said, "As much as my instincts told me not to bring them inside, I did anyway. They look like helpless kids." The husband took the children into the living room. The wife went to the kitchen to make them hot cocoa. And immediately, the house knew. They had 4 cats. Normally the cats were friendly, curious. Now they were all gone, all hiding, except one, Pigeon. The wife saw him in the kitchen, and the hair on his neck was standing on end. His tail was puffed up, and he was staring into the living room, hissing and growling. She had never seen him do that before. She walked back into the living room, and the kids were sitting on the couch, perfectly still. Her husband was holding his head in his hands. "What's wrong?" she asked. He said he felt dizzy, all of a sudden out of nowhere. She turned to the kids to give them their cocoa, and they looked up at her. She gasped. She said it took everything inside of her not to drop the mugs and run. Their eyes were completely black. They had no whites, just giant black pupils. Seeing her fear, the children stood up. They spoke in that same sing-songy, monotonous voice.
"Can we use the bathroom?"
She showed them down the hall, and they went in together. She ran back to her husband. "Did you see their eyes?" He had. As they were frantically trying to figure out what was happening, the husband's nose began to bleed. He never had nosebleeds before. The wife knew in her bones it was because of the children. She started to cry and ran to get him a tissue. That's when the power went out. She heard her husband yell her name, and she started back down the dark hallway and stopped dead. The 2 children were standing at the end of it, motionless, staring at her in the dark. She said she had never been so scared in her life. After a long, terrible silence, the boy spoke.
"Our parents are here."
The 2 children walked to the front door, opened it, and walked out, leaving it wide open. The husband, dizzy, staggered to the window. At the end of their driveway, a black car was idling. 2 men, very tall, and in black suits were standing by it. The husband waved. The men just stared. and they got in their car and drove off. The power came back on half an hour later, but for the couple, life was never the same. Over the next few months, 3 of their 4 cats went missing. The last one, Pigeon, they came home one day to find him in a puddle of blood on the living room floor. The vet said it was some kind of internal hemorrhage. The husband's nosebleeds became a regular occurrence. Then he was diagnosed with an aggressive, rare form of skin cancer. The doctors were baffled by this. They said it was the kind linked to extreme overuse of tanning beds, but the husband had never used one in his life. They couldn't explain. They couldn't understand how it had gotten so bad, so quickly. Then the wife, she began to suffer from regular dizzy spells and nosebleeds. Her health collapsed. In her own words, "I am suddenly in the worst condition of my life, and no one can do anything about it. I know that all of this is because I let the black-eyed children into my home. I wish my husband had never opened the door." These beings, whatever they are, seem to operate on a single, terrifying rule. They are powerless unless you give them power. They need your permission. They need an invitation. But once you give it, you can't take it back. The rules of the black-eyed children are ancient. They feel almost vampiric, but vampires are just one theory of what they are. There are others. Some believe they're ghosts. Some interdimensional beings. Whatever these inhumanoids are, just consider, what if some of these interdimensional inhumans began glitching? "What is it?" he asked. The wife was standing in the middle of their kitchen, the knife still in her hand. She was frozen, staring at the empty doorway. She didn't answer. Her face was pale. Then she let out a loud gasp, and that's when he looked too, and he saw it, just for a fraction of a second, a glimpse of someone turning the corner at the end of the hallway, moving silently toward the living room, where their 5-year-old daughter was alone. His mind went to one terrible, logical place. Someone is in the house. We spend most of our lives building a place we call home. It's more than just walls and a roof. It's our one truly safe space. It's the space where the laws of reality are supposed to be reliable. The front door is locked. The windows are closed. You are safe. But what happens when that safety just breaks? What happens when you're in the kitchen and you see somebody walk down your hallway that isn't supposed to be there? And what happens when you realize they're not an intruder, they're an impossibility? This happened just a few months ago to a young couple living in a 2-bedroom apartment. We'll call them Mark and Sarah. It was a normal afternoon. They were preparing lunch. Their 5-year-old daughter, who we'll call Lily, was in the living room just down the hall, watching Bluey on TV. You know, one of those perfect, lazy domestic moments. The layout of their apartment is important. From the kitchen doorway, you can see a small section of the hallway that led to the living room and to the front door. They were on the 3rd floor. Nobody else was home. Sarah was at the counter cutting up food. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table behind her, and they were just chatting. Sarah started to turn around and say something to Mark, but she stopped mid-sentence. She just froze, and her eyes were locked on the kitchen doorway. Mark looked up. "What is it?" She didn't move. She didn't breathe. Then came the gasp, a sharp, terrified intake of air. Mark's head snapped toward the door. He only saw the tail end of it, a flash of motion, what looked like a person just turning the corner at the end of the hall and heading right for the living room. His blood ran cold, and his mind did the only math it could. Someone broke in, they didn't hear them, and Lily is in there, alone. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the knife from the counter block, yelled at Sarah to call the police, and rushed out of the kitchen, knife in hand. He burst into the living room, bracing himself for he didn't know what. And he saw nothing. Just his daughter sitting on the couch, surrounded by her toys. The TV was playing, and she looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion. "What's up?" she asked. Imagine for a second what she was seeing. Her dad, wild-eyed, a knife in hand, panting. He tried to play it off. Did you see anybody come in here just now?" And she shook her head, completely clueless. His panic didn't fade. It just shifted a little bit. He checked the living room, behind the curtains, in the closet. Nothing. He went to the front door. It was still locked, deadbolted from the inside. He checked their bedroom, his daughter's bedroom. He looked in every wardrobe, under every bed. This was a 2-bedroom apartment. There was nowhere to hide. He checked the windows. All of them were closed and locked, and mind you, they live on the 3rd floor. If someone went out the window, they'd be a puddle on the pavement below. The entire search took maybe 10 minutes. There was no one. There was no sign of a break-in, no sound of an escape. There was logically no possible way of anybody else to be in that apartment. And if that was true, what type of inhumanoid did they just see? He walked back to the kitchen, knife still heavy in his hand, and his wife Sarah was exactly where he left her. She was leaning against the counter, ugly crying. She hadn't called the police. She had been too scared to even move. He put the knife down and went to her, telling her it was okay and no one was there. The apartment was clear. And when she finally calmed down enough to speak, she told him what she saw. See, Mark had only caught a glimpse of the person turning the corner. His wife, she got the good look. She said that when she looked up, there was a woman standing in the hallway, looking back at her. She was tall, taller than Sarah, and she was wearing a floral dress and high heels. And this is the detail that gets me. And all this time, the wife cutting vegetables, the husband talking, the TV playing, neither of them heard a sound. No footsteps, no high heels clicking on the wood floor. Just silence. Sarah said the woman stood there for a second, and when she realized she'd been seen, she stopped. She looked right at Sarah and made eye contact. And Sarah swears that this woman, this inhumanoid, looked exactly like her daughter Lily, but older, much older, like seeing her daughter as a grown woman. That was the moment Sarah froze. That's what made her gasp. And the second she gasped, the woman hurried away, turning the corner into the living room. And the part Mark saw, the end of it. Mark said later that if he hadn't seen a glimpse of motion himself, he would have thought his wife was losing her mind. He would have scheduled therapy, but he did see it. He saw something. They were both in the kitchen. Their daughter was in the living room. So who was this woman in the hallway? They've never figured it out. They've never seen her again. But they know, with absolute certainty, it happened. It was just a moment. A few seconds where the walls of their apartment got thin. Where reality just tore apart. We call them doppelgangers, time slips, a glitch in the matrix. But these encounters, where people see someone or something that shouldn't exist, who looks like someone they know, they're more common than you think. They are interdimensional. And they raise a terrifying question. If an older version of your daughter can just walk through your apartment, what else can? And what happens when the thing you see isn't good at pretending to be human? Ghostbuster Dan Aykroyd was standing on a New York sidewalk, taking a break from filming his television show. He looked across the street. A black, unmarked sedan was parked there. Inside, a tall man in a plain black suit was staring right at him. Aykroyd looked away, a bit unsettled, and when he looked back, the car and the man were gone. Just hours later, producers from the Sci-Fi Channel, the network he was working for, called him. The show was being shut down immediately. The segments they'd already filmed, they'd never be released. Dan Aykroyd, one of the most famous actors in the world, had just been silenced. Now, I gotta tell you, I love Dan Aykroyd. The man is a legend. Ghostbusters, Saturday Night Live, the Blues Brothers, the Coneheads. He's a genuine comedy icon. And I also believe he has absolutely no reason to lie, which makes this story so terrifying. We all know the image. Black suit, white shirt, the skinny tie, the sunglasses, the Blues Brothers look. But Aykroyd said himself that the look was based on something else, something real. He said he based it on the urban legend of the Men in Black. We all know the Men in Black from movies, the charming, funny alien hunting super agents. But the real lore, the stories that witnesses have been retelling for 70 years, they aren't funny at all. The Men in Black of legend aren't here to protect us. They're here to silence us. We actually have a whole video on the channel exploring the deep lore of the Men in Black, where they started, the Albert Bender case, the sulfur smell, all of it, and you can check that out by clicking the card up top. But the short version is this. Since the 1950s, people who have profound UFO encounters, people who see something they shouldn't have seen, people with something strange in their neighborhood, they get a visit. Sometimes hours, sometimes just minutes after their sighting. A black vintage model car, often a Cadillac, that looks brand new but is 30 years old, will pull up to their house. 2 or 3 men in ill-fitting suits get out, and witnesses say they don't look right. They're often described as having pale, plastic-looking skin, no eyebrows, and voices that sound flat, robotic, or telepathic. They move stiffly. They seem to be confused by simple human things like food or doorknobs. But they know things they cannot possibly know. They know the witness's name. They know what the witness saw, and they deliver a single, simple message. Stop talking about it, or else. These are the real men in black, and for decades, Dan Aykroyd wasn't just fascinated by them. He based his most famous characters on them. He thought it was just folklore, until it happened to him. In the early 2000s, Dan Aykroyd was producing a show for the Sci-Fi Channel. It was called Out There. The entire series was about his lifelong passion for the UFO phenomenon. See, Aykroyd isn't a casual observer. He's been a deep, passionate believer since he was a kid, ever since he read a Life magazine article in 1952 about UFO sightings over Washington, D.C. The show was his chance to bring his research to the public. He was in New York City filming a segment for the show. He was interviewing a woman who claimed to have had an experience with an alien entity. The interview was going well. They were getting incredible, compelling footage. Aykroyd, excited, stepped outside of the building to get some air and to take a phone call. He was standing on the curb, talking on his cell phone, when he saw it. A black Ford sedan parked just across the street. Inside, he could see a very tall, very large man. He was wearing a plain black suit. And the man was just watching him. Aykroyd knows this lore better than anybody. He felt that familiar, cold dread, and he tried to ignore it. He turned his back to the car and continued his phone call. He was rattled. He told himself he was just being paranoid. He had been talking about this stuff all day. Of course he was seeing things. He finished his call, took a deep breath, and turned back around. By that time, the black car was gone. There was no sound of an engine starting, no squeal of tires, and in the middle of Manhattan traffic, it had simply vanished. Aykroyd, deeply disturbed, went back inside to continue filming. But the mood had shifted. The crew was on edge. Not even 2 hours later, the producers from the network called, and they told him the show was being pulled right now. Stop filming, they said. Aykroyd was stunned. He argued with them. This was his passion project. They had amazing footage. The network executive on the other end was cold, flat. He just said, "The show is canceled. Stop. We're pulling the plug." And they did. The show Out There was shut down mid-production. The footage that had already been shot, the interview with the alien abductee, all of it was locked away. And it has never been seen to this day. A skeptic would say that's just Hollywood. Shows get canceled every day. Budgets get cut. But to Dan Aykroyd, it was the Men in Black. He believes they were listening. He believes he got too close to something and was warned off, just like Albert Bender was 50 years earlier. And why does Dan Aykroyd think they're here? Why are they here? He doesn't think they're here to help us. He believes they're disgusted with us. He said in an interview, "We are a violent species. They don't want anything to do with us. They watch us." He talks about 9/11, claiming that for 2 minutes, CNN's cameras captured 2 white orbs hovering over the second tower as it fell. They never showed that footage again. He imagines what advanced minds would think, watching us. These humans crashing our highest evolution in aviation into our highest evolution in architecture and metallurgy, like kids wrecking toys in a sandbox. And his final conclusion is chilling. They are disgusted with us, and rightly so, because we are a depraved, disgusting species. This isn't a character Dan Aykroyd is playing. This is what he truly believes. It's not just a theory for him. It's personal. He's had other experiences. Experiences that prove to him someone or something is watching. He told a story once about a night in upstate New York. He woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. He sat upright in his bed, and then he had an urge. He described to his wife, "They're calling me," he said. "They want me to go outside. Something wants me to go outside and see." His wife, terrified, begged him not to go, and he listened to her. He didn't go. He just lay there, awake, feeling the impossible pull until morning. He thought it was just a strange, vivid dream, until he turned on the news. The next day, all over New York, Ontario, Quebec, and Vermont, 12,000 people all reported having the exact same urge. The overwhelming, unexplainable need to go outside at 3 a.m. and look at the sky. The Air Force, of course, said it was just a Chinese rocket exploding. But what those 12,000 people saw was a massive, miles-high pink spiral in the sky. When a man like Dan Aykroyd, a man who spent his life making us laugh, tells us a terrifying story like this, you have to listen. He wasn't trying to sell a movie. He wasn't trying to get famous. He is famous. He was just reporting. He saw the men in black, and they saw him. They are the gatekeepers, the silencers, the ones that stand between us and the things that are really going on. They're the ones who show up when someone gets too close to the truth. But they're not the only ones out there. The men in black are terrifying, as they are at least organized. They seem to have a purpose. But what about encounters that have no purpose at all? The ones that seem to be nothing but pure, unfiltered, impossible chaos. What do you do when the men in black are replaced by the pale crawlers? The moonlight is pale, filtering through the trees. You're walking on a narrow forest trail, and every sense is on high alert. You're used to long nights alone in the wilderness. But something about this evening sets your nerves on edge. A heavy silence hangs in the air. Then just ahead, you catch a glimpse of something that makes your blood run cold. A gaunt, pale figure is crouched beside a tree. Your flashlight beam hits its hairless flesh, so white it seems to glow in the dark. You're paralyzed. The creature turns its head. It has a lipless mouth, lined with tiny, razor-sharp teeth. And its eyes are like endless black voids, staring deep into your soul. In a blink of the eye, the apparition scuttles into the thicket with an unnatural speed, leaving you alone in the shadows. You're left shaking, asking one question. What was that thing? We've all heard the stories. The Wendigo, the Rake, creatures that mimic humanity. But they get it wrong. But the entity that people are seeing more and more, from the backwoods of Kentucky to the suburbs of California, is something completely different. Something that feels older. They're known as pale crawlers. These aren't just your standard campfire tale. They're a specific phenomenon. The specific phenomenon of the pale crawler is actually pretty recent, first entering the public consciousness in the early 2000s, right as internet forums began connecting people who had seen something they couldn't quite explain. And what they're describing is terrifyingly consistent. Witnesses almost always describe them the same way. They are humanoid, but not human. They stand between 5 and 7 feet tall, but they're rarely seen standing. They're seen crouching. Their limbs are elongated, bent at impossible angles. Their skin is a sickly pale white, completely hairless. Some even say it looks translucent, like you can almost see veins or bones beneath the surface. The proportions are all wrong. Oversized heads, mouth full of needle-like teeth, and the eyes. Always the eyes. Endless black voids. But the most unsettling part, their movement. Witnesses say they move with an unnatural, arachnid-like gait, an unsettling scuttle. Despite their sickly skeletal appearance, they possess shocking speed and agility, able to squeeze into impossibly small spaces or dash across a dark road in the blink of an eye. Now, you might be thinking, that's just the Rake. It's a creepypasta. But then there's footage. One of the most famous hotspots for these things is Fresno, California. They're seen so often, they have a local nickname, the Fresno Nightcrawlers. And in the mid-2000s, home security cameras captured something impossible. The video is chilling. A pair of spindly pale legs with no torso, no head, just casually walks across a dark lawn at night. It looks like a stick figure brought to life. In 2011, almost identical footage surfaced from Yosemite National Park. Park officials, of course, denied the authenticity, but the images, they'll stick with you. And they're not just in California. A woman from rural Illinois described an experience from her childhood. Her family was driving at night when a gaunt humanoid figure dashed across the road in front of their car. She only saw it for a second, but she said the memory of its elongated limbs and pale, glowing flesh still gives her nightmares decades later. Encounters with these things are almost always brief. They don't seem to want to be seen. But those who have seen them up close all report the same visceral reaction. It's not just shock, it's not just fear. They describe it as an overwhelmingly primal urge. The kind of animal brain panic that makes you want to run, to hide, to simply cease to exist. It's the feeling that makes a Bigfoot sighting feel like seeing a deer. A young woman named Mariah, an amateur cryptozoologist, told researchers about her encounter while camping as a teenager in Mexico. She said the sighting sparked her lifelong curiosity, but it also broke something. It showed her that there was something wrong with the world that she thought she knew. But for as terrifying as they are, there's almost no evidence to suggest they're aggressive toward humans. They seem reclusive, wary. They scare us, but they also seem scared of us. So what are we looking at here? The theories, as you can imagine, are all over the map. Some cryptozoologists draw parallels to ancient myths, ghouls, vampires, the Wendigo, creatures said to prey on human flesh. A more grounded hypothesis say that they're an undiscovered species, a new evolutionary offshoot of us early hominids, adapted for a life spent in dense forest, or more terrifyingly, underground. That would explain the pale skin, the lack of hair, the large, dark adapted eyes. But there's a more radical theory. The pale crawlers aren't from here at all. They're interdimensional, inhumanoid beings, temporarily crossing through rifts or portals into our world. It would explain their sudden appearances and their impossible vanishing acts. The truth is, we don't know. But here at the other side, I have a special interest in this. As some of you may know, we have extensively covered the Red River Gorge crawler in 2 separate videos on this channel. The accounts from that part of Kentucky, they're some of the most compelling and most terrifying I've ever come across. And I'll make you a promise right now. If I ever get a chance to take this channel full time, we are going and doing a full, on-the-ground investigation in Red River Gorge. And we're going to try to find it. Because unlike so many other legends, this one feels dangerously real. People often confuse the pale crawler with another, more violent entity created on the internet, the rake. The rake is aggressive. It attacks. It's a creature of pure malice. The pale crawler, it watches. It hides. It is an animal just trying to survive in a world where it isn't supposed to exist. A retired marine biologist in Florida, a man named James, had an encounter that went viral online. He's dedicated the rest of his life searching the remote swamps and forest for answers. Because that's what these things do. They don't scare you. They break your understanding of the world. They show you that the map of reality you've been using has gaping holes in it. And in those holes, Inhumans live. The pale crawler is a modern mystery. An entity born in the dark woods and given a name by the internet. It's a reminder, no matter how much we build, how much we pave, how much we light up the night, we are still just visitors in a very, very old world. We are not the only things that walk through the trees, but sometimes the threat isn't in the woods. It's not an animal. It's not a monster. The Grinning Man, the black-eyed children, the pale crawler, the men in black, the woman in the hallway. They all share one bone-chilling trait. They look almost like us. It's a special kind of terror, isn't it? That feeling when our reality is just a thin sheet of ice, and these things, these inhumanoids, can punch right through it whenever they want. It makes you wonder how many of them are out there walking among us. How many do we pass on the street every day and just fail to notice? What if that person you just passed? What if the reason you felt that sudden, cold chill wasn't just the wind? The pale crawler is terrifying, but it's nothing compared to the disturbing encounters Reddit users have had with real stalkers. Click the video on the screen right now to hear 50 minutes of disturbing Let's Not Meet stories. Thank you all. I love you. Bye.